start at 7. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for taking time out to join us for such an important and meaningful discussion. My name is Francesca Leopold. I am the second vice chair on Community Board 9 and chair for the Health and Social Services. I also serve as the chair for the review board at Kings County Hospital. This mental health program this evening caption is Mental Health and You, Getting Your Mind Right. We have a few capable persons on our panel this evening, and they will give you information pertaining to the programs that they're working with. We have Mr. Keno Bob from Interfaith Hospital. We have Latoya Delmar from Delmarge from Kings County Hospital. We also have one Moranan from the Department of Health, and we'll also be hearing from Maria Abadi, who will give us some information as to the program she's running at the DA's office. It is quite a privilege to have all of you here because this conversation is late in coming, but nevertheless, it is happening and it is very important to our community. As earlier discussed, we're just having a short discussion pertaining to the young man on the subway who was killed on the subway. And ironically so, when I looked at his photo is someone that I know during the summer. And I used to be at the Manhattan office. He used to be right out there by the mayor's office outside and attracting the tourists dancing and imitating Michael Jackson, and then having his little bucket on the outside, getting funds and stuff. So it is just a shame that he would lost his life in this manner. But then here we are talking about mental health. And I think, it is a conversation, not just tonight, but that it is a conversation that needs to be continued in our communities, not a one-time deal. It needs to be continued on different parts of our community, bringing mental health. I know so many persons have been talking about it, the news media and everything, but in our community, most times, we wait until something happens to really come out. But precaution is better than cure, and we need to empower people. We need to bring much awareness to the community. Now I will pass over to Ms. Dillard, who she will give us our open remarks, and then she will introduce Mr. Bob.
Thank you so much, Ms. Leopold. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ina Dillard. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for One Brooklyn Health System, and it's my pleasure to be here this evening and to be a member of the Health and Social Services Committee of Community Board 9. It's a pleasure to be here to observe Mental Health Awareness Month, addressing this evening the current rise in mental health in our country, and most specifically our communities. Tonight, we're going to highlight care and treatment that is currently available from our community partners and healthcare organizations. And to start our conversation off, I'd like to introduce Mr. Keno Bob. Mr. Keno Bob works at Interfaith Medical Center in the role of psychotherapist/social worker, providing individual, group, and family therapy at the Bishop Walker Integrated Center. He achieved his graduate degree from Silberman School of Social Work, Hunter College, and has worked in the field of human and social services for over 20 years in multiple roles and capacities. So everyone, please welcome Mr. Keno Bob.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everyone.
Mr. Bob, just before you begin, I would like to take this opportunity also to welcome our public relations director from Kings County Hospital, who is joining us here tonight, and then also to welcome the Health and Social Services Committee from Community Board 9. So thank you so much for all of you who are present, and I'll pass it over to Mr. Bob.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Community board members, fellow speakers, all participants this evening. It's a great honor to be here, to be able to represent One Brooklyn Health in this capacity. Mental health is something that, as we can see in our daily daily lives is something that's very important. It's imperative for us to really grasp the understanding of what this thing called mental health is, and how can we, go about, living our lives and understanding mental illness, mental health, and how we can educate our communities, educate our families, and as individuals, how can we go about navigating this life? First and foremost, I want to thank you for that introduction. I know I've been in this field in multiple capacities and roles for almost 20 years. I started when I was 5 years old. That's a joke. So, as I look at my bio and I hear the things that I've experienced and the roles that I've filled throughout these many years, there's something that's always motivated me along this journey. And the lives that I have encountered, I think it is enhanced my experience so much. And it's afforded me the ability to, to really gain the knowledge that I need to move forward in this capacity, in this role as a social worker, and as a psychotherapist, and sometimes I look at myself and my accomplishments and I ask myself sincerely, what is it that I have accomplished? Right? What is it that I've gotten out of this entire experience to date? So this is going to be like the baseline for my talk, my brief talk today. So you may ask yourself, what is my bio and what is things that I've experienced, right, enable me to provide you with information on mental health? So first and foremost, we want to exactly understand like what mental health is, and how it is briefly or stated. And let me just get my notes together here. All right. So the understanding the basics of mental health, right? Mental health plays an important role in our overall well-being. And it's estimated like 19.6% of Americans ages 18 and older, about 1 in 5 adults will experience a mental health problem this year. But studies show that most people with mental problems get better and may recover completely. Many factors contribute to mental health problems, including life experiences such as trauma or history of abuse, substance use, factors such as biological factors, some genes, chemical imbalances in your brain, family history, or mental health problems. All these things can contribute to what indicates or initiates mental illness, right? So on the flip side, the mental health, let's get a definition of what mental health is, right? Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress and how we relate to others and make choices. Now, as we've seen in the news recently, right, is how do individuals react with a mental illness in terms of specific situations that they may encounter, right? Normally, an individual may be able to handle that stress. For an individual with mental health that has able to to compose himself and to understand circumstances. So individuals with mental health may not be able to fully grasp the concept of situations, how they react to specific things. So your thinking and your mood and behavior can be affected, which can contribute to the adverse reactions of the people in our general public that don't have a firm understanding and a firm grasp in terms of what's going on with an individual that has a mental illness. All right. Taking care of one's mental health is just as important as taking care of one's physical health. Overall health includes, a well-balanced diet, nutritious diet, and regular exercise. So these are the same things that we put into our bodies physically, the same things that we need to put into our minds mentally in order for us to process information, to be able to handle ourselves in extreme or stressful situations so that we don't overreact and things get out of hand, such as we've seen in the news as recently. At One Brooklyn Health, I must say that we do offer an integrated service program where we have individuals that have substance use, provided programs for our CDOS program, the substance dependence services. We also have behavioral health programs for adults within our clinic. We offer an alternative housing program. So they have individuals that may have substance use, mental health issues. They're able to receive services based upon their specific needs, individualized planning, case management, medical and psychological services that they offer at One Brooklyn Health as well, to be able to encapsulate and have wraparound services for each and every person that we encounter and that we come into contact with within our community. So at this point right now, I'm going to throw a few words out. Okay, and these words may be associated and linked with the stigmas that are associated with mental health within our communities. All right, fear, pride, trust, deceit, illusion, self-esteem, barriers, love, anger, hate. Now, these are all words that you may say, well, what does this have to do with mental health? What do we do? How do these words all fit into this picture that we're painting here for mental health? So, as we think on these words, let's put things into perspective. All right. So why are we overshadowed at times when it comes to getting treatment? Why is it that we feel this huge stigma when it's related to seeking help? Right? And I can speak specifically for myself as a Black male with West Indian Caribbean background, that as a child, as a young boy, I was always told, right? Boys are not supposed to cry, right? With that being said, it's like preventing an individual from displaying their vulnerabilities, right? Not ensuring that, you know, I could be honest with myself and share how I'm feeling. So generationally, I strongly believe that as young men, we've always been told to tighten up, to man up, right? Don't you dare show any sense of vulnerability, because you know what? That's a surefire sign of weakness, right? So to overcome that stigma, it takes. I'm sorry.
What about you fucking nigga?
Is that one of those pranksters, I guess? Okay. All right.
My apologies for that. We'll expel them from the room. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Thank you. Yeah. So going back to what I was saying, on the track of being vulnerable, and as a psychotherapist, you know, working individually with predominantly Black males, males of color, males of the Caribbean diaspora, I attempt to always engage a person where they're at, right? That's what I've been taught. That's what we need to do. Meet the people, meet the client where they're at. So when I deal with men in the clinical realm, I always attempt to reach them in a sense where they can understand that being vulnerable is not a problem. The problem is when you live in denial and you do not share what's truly and sincerely going on with you. What's bothering you? What's the problem? And I think when you can identify as a therapist, when the client can identify with you, that provides them a bit of ease, right? And one thing that I truly do get when I'm in this facility, whether it be at Bishop Walker Clinic or when I'm at Interfaith Hospital on Atlantic Avenue, I see people that look like me, right? I see people that talk like me. I see people that have come from the experience and the places that I've come from, and I get a sense of immediate comfort, warmth, welcome. And I sincerely believe that's one aspect that, as a male therapist of color, the empathy that I provide with the clients, right, that bridges a gap. Because in order for the clients to feel welcomed, in order for the clients to be able to open up and be as expressive as they possibly can, they need to feel and sense that identification, that gap being bridged. So that's something that I sincerely relate with and I relate to, and I get from the individuals that I work with professionally and the clients that we serve, the demographic that we do serve. So when we talk about mental health and why is this such a taboo, right? And having forums like this provide us with a sense of education, right? Listening and hearing from other professionals within this field, right? We have to take into consideration another thing, right? What are some of the triggers? What are some of the things that sets us apart in the community, right? We have the systematic racism, right? Economic and financial woes, lack of housing, substance use, self-medication. These are things that are prevalent, right? These are things that are basically catalysts for mental illness. Within our communities, we are very reluctant to share what's going on with us. We definitely think like, you know what, I as a man, I have to go on and I have to do this myself. It's a lot of I, right? Whereas if you would to allow someone to enter into your life, right, and provide you with that assistance, because we have internal resources that, like I said, we have multiple services at the integrated center. In addition to that, we can provide you with external resources that you may need to get the assistance that best suits you. So the communication, the resources, you know, everything that is basically needed and necessary for an individual to receive help is here. You know, and I think that's one of the things that I truly pride myself on, and being in this role, in this position, is having the ability to reach people and to work in a community that I generally, I grew up in, you know, and it's safe to say that I honestly seen people that I see now and I grew up with them, and, you know, even if there are patients here, you know, it's sad to some extent to see what people have experienced and what they've gone through, you know, and the conditions in which they are living in now. But it's reassuring to know that someone that knows them, someone that's been around and have witnessed their level of greatness or quote unquote normalcy, right? So I don't let's look at individuals as being a number or a piece of paper, right? I see people as they are, as human beings, right? And I think if anything from my 20 plus years in this role or in this position, in this field, has afforded me the ability to be humanistic and to empathize with individuals, you know, so definitely having these conversations, you know, opening up our doors to the community, being welcoming, being empathetic, you know, educating ourselves as professionals in terms of, you know, the modern trends in medicine, you know, the modern trends and theories and practices and evidence-based things that we need to do to provide our top notch of service and to be committed. You know, there's nothing better than a level of commitment and sincerity that comes from a professional in this field. And the fact of, I always tell my clients, you're not a diagnosis, right? A lot of the times people say, oh, I have schizophrenia, I'm depressed. You know, I'm depressed. No, you're not depressed. Your name is Jane. You're living with a condition of depression, right? That does not mean that you have to embody this diagnosis and walk around with it as a burden. No, you have to learn to live and to enjoy your life, you know, such as an individual with diabetes, right? You go to dialysis, you know, you take your medication and you live, right? So the same mode and the same focus and the same attention is what we have to imply to individuals that with mental illness. It can and it will get better, but it's about educating yourself, it's about learning, it's about being honest and sincere and open with your condition, with your provider, right? And as a therapist, I have an interdisciplinary team that we work with other clinicians, nurse practitioners, psychiatrists, right? And we formulate this team and a treatment plan and a plan of action in which to get an individual to what they need to go. You know, I had a lot of statistics and a lot of things that I wanted to actually present, but generally speaking, it's like I just want to present the fact that we know as professionals what mental illness looks like. We see it daily on the news in terms of individuals being mistreated, being misused, being abused by professionals that are put in place to protect and to serve them. And it angers me at times with the policies that are in place, and the loopholes that are provided for people to sincerely to keep going on this treadmill of life with no ending and no hope in sight. So it really invigorates me, and it wants me to get to the point where policy can be changed, where policy can be affected, where we can reach that individual in the street before they get to the point of these dire circumstances. Because if there's one thing that we must understand, that it's not just the face of mental illness has to change, because it's not the disheveled individual that's laying in the gutters. That's not mental illness. Mental illness could be my brother, my cousin, right? My uncle, my mother, my father, my neighbor, right? The individual that you most likely will not believe has mental illness because they're covering it up, right? So we have to treat individuals as human beings, right? Educate ourselves as working professionals and develop a strong and purposeful sense of empathy as we provide this service on a daily basis. Because that same person that's coming, they may not be ready at that particular moment. But if the goal is to allow them to keep coming, so one day they may get it. So for us, we have to stay vigilant in this fight, educate ourselves, right? And be empathetic to the cause. Because without this community, without these resources, where do our people stand?
So, Mr. Bob.
Yes, ma'am.
You might have answered this question narrowly. How do we relay the message that seeking mental health assistance can be considered strength and not a weakness?
Well, I strongly believe with any individual that refuses to seek assistance or seek help for something that they're experiencing, they're committing an act of weakness there in itself. So the moment that somebody was to come through that threshold of our doors and say that they need help, that's developing a sense of strength right there in itself. And to further answer that question, as vigilant as we are in the office, in our studies, in our education, in our practice, we have to be just as visible in our streets as well, and how we conduct ourselves, the role models that we are, the roles that we provide and we present, right? We have to be as equally as sincere and as visible in our activities daily, and we have to attempt to provide a sense of outreach to our community, keep our doors open, keep our resources going, and allow people to understand it's okay.
So as my next question to you is, what roles does social contents, including age, we look at occupation, we look at education or income, how does it moderate the relationship between stigma and help seeking?
Well, the thing about it is the barriers that we need to break down in terms of an individual that's coming from a high economic standpoint, medium economic standpoint, so a low economic standpoint, right? We have to have the ability to, and the resources to have individuals that are at the minimum of income to the highest. We have to be able to provide services to individuals regardless to their ability to pay. And we have to make them feel that comfort. We have to make them feel that understanding. And we have to make them know that services will be rendered to you, regardless to what your economic status is, right? And I think that the bridging that gap has to do a lot with the policies in place in certain specific clinics, allowing individuals to, be able to find these resources, put things into context, generally speaking, age, race, gender, we can't allow that to be barriers in terms of allowing or providing services to anyone.
Okay, very good. And I will leave my last questions for last. Do we have any questions before I go ahead to introduce the next speaker? Any questions for Mr. Bob? Because it's interactive. I just want us to ask as the presenters do the presentation. I want us to just think of the questions and just interact as we go along. So, Mina, floor is yours. Your audio is bad.
Is this better?
A little better. Go ahead. Let me.
I'm sorry. I was wondering, how does an individual recognize I need help?
I could barely. You said something about an individual.
How do you
We have-
recognize that you need help?
Do we have a chat? Maybe a chat box.
Oh, I believe mine says, how do you recognize when a person needs help?
Oh, okay. How do I recognize when a person needs help? And now you're speaking just generally in the office, or in what position, what condition are they in?
Just a family member?
Okay. Well, generally speaking, we know if it's somebody that we know, that we're familiar with, right? And we see them quite often, and we know their behaviors, we know their patterns, like for instance, I'll provide an example. Let's say you have a Uncle Charlie, right? That he's a known drinker, right? He's an alcoholic. So Uncle Charlie went into rehab, he went into treatment, and he's gotten himself together. He's living a life of recovery. This is something that we deal with regularly and routinely. So Uncle Charlie's been sober for 6 months, right? You see him routinely. His behaviors have changed, his patterns changed. He's cleaned up, he's clean cut, and he's doing well, right? But again, with recovery, right? There's always a problem or a chance of relapse. And such as you could put this and factor this into any other condition that an individual is dealing with, let's say a mental health condition, right? But we're speaking on alcoholism at this point. So Uncle Charlie has been fine for the last 6 months. He's coming, he's responsible, he's showing up, he's very attentive. One day, he does not show up. So, okay, do a day off or so. But then he develops a pattern. So now you start seeing different behaviors. He's not showing up, right? One day he may come in, he looks a bit disheveled. So now red flags can be going up, these signs. So these are little things that we look at, right? If an individual is with mental illness, let's say schizophrenia, for instance, and he may be acting a bit erratic, right? Anything outside of your normal routine, right? These are things that you look for. Right. And the quicker or the more sooner that you intervene with this individual, you're able to provide him with some assistance so he could better regulate himself and his behaviors and seek the help that he needs. So it's always good. When we talk about education and knowing those signs, it's always good to know these things because prevention is better than cure. And it's always good to catch something before it escalates into something else. Right. That's a great question.
So I'm happy that Mina asked that question because one of the issues, one of my concerns, especially in young people, because many a times you find that parents, some parents are so busy, they are not paying close attention to when the children start changing, the mannerisms start changing, the different things that they used to do, because sometimes when they were very active, they would be out there, they would be talking and talkative, you have to be chasing them all the time. And there comes a time when they just like close up, they're staying in the bedroom, they stop talking, they stop, eating, so many different things are going on. And, parents are, oh, yeah, she's just going through a phase. you know, and it happens not only in children, it happens in grown-ups as well. And then persons have to be mindful, have to take a second look and say, hey, something is wrong, you know, and have a conversation with that person. And if you are not able, or you're not at the place where you can have a conversation with the child, you know, maybe you could go to the school, and sometimes the school, they call you and say, hey, you know, Johnny, something, did you notice anything different about Johnny at home? And all you would say, oh, Johnny is fine, but something is happening in school. And that's the reason why the teachers are questioning you, and you need to start opening. But a lot of persons, oh, they're getting older, they're just going through a phase until it gets too late and things start getting out of hand. And then they start fighting in school and different things start happening. So we just want persons in the schools that they have that, bring that awareness to schools, as well as in homes, that people start seeing the different behavior, the change in behavior in the children. And the same thing, as you mentioned, the same thing goes to adults as well, because there comes a certain time. And I'm happy that you spoke about the Caribbean people, because you find that as a Caribbean woman as well, growing up in the Caribbean, you feel say, well, that person has some mental issue. They see it as taboo, they see it's a crime. So if anything happens, they take it and they sweep it under the carpet, and they don't want to seek help. And persons just don't understand. And we Black people coming from the Caribbean, we just don't understand. There is nothing wrong with seeking help. There is nothing wrong is going and talking to somebody. You know, it is very important that we do that. So I'm very happy with the conversation, and when you spoke about men, because that the men in our community, they just feel that it's, you know, it's beyond them to go sit in a chair to talk to somebody. Just say, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed and this is happening. And sometimes you see persons, and we're looking at occupation, we're looking at education, we are looking at income. And sometimes the persons you least think who would commit suicide or do something drastic, they're the ones who are doing it. And it's like, what is that person do? This person has a great job. This person may have money. They can go, they can buy anything that they want, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. And it is very important for us to have that conversation in the home, outside of the home, and men, even with the men who are there is nothing wrong to talk to somebody. You're going through something, talk to your friends. As I move on, thank you so much. I know that more persons will have questions for you. I just want to introduce Latoya Delmarge from Kings County. Latoya Delmarge, I'm only hope I'm not butchering your last name, is a licensed clinical social worker who functions as the director of the Social Work Behavioral Health Department at Kings County Hospital Center. Prior to her career at Kings County, Ms. Delmarge developed and oversaw an Article 31 and Satellite 822 community-based clinic in Brooklyn. With more than 10 years of clinical mental health experience, Latoya is well-versed in various evidence-based practice and specializes in mindfulness-based treatment. Latoya oversees more than 70 staff in the social work department at Kings County, who provide exceptional patient care and mental health service to the Brooklyn community. Latoya is a proud educator of Touro University, where she received a master's degree in social work and is currently a doctoral candidate at Liberty University. Ms. Delmarge has spent her career addressing gaps in treatment for vulnerable population and providing education and mental health needs and services. Please welcome Ms. Latoya Delmarge.
Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone who is on tonight. Thank you, Mr. Bob, for laying the groundwork for me, just really addressing stigma, or the real topic like on stigma. I get real passionate about conversations related to mental health, and I always feel the need to really address the difference between mental health and mental illness, because sometimes, you know, we think that we're exempt, but everyone who's actually on tonight, we all fall under the category of having mental health. Sometimes our mental health may not be good and may be compromised in some way. And sometimes, you know, our mental health may be great depending on what period of our life we're in. But when we're thinking about mental illness, it's really based on a DSM-5 now diagnosis that has specific symptoms and criterias and really justification for treatment. But I'm just really going to be piggybacking off of what Mr. Bob has really already presented. I think, you know, just what he talked about in regards to stigma. I think that as a discipline, we've really been able to address the stigma. I think the more that we have conversations about mental health and, you know, mental illness, is the more people are becoming aware of where they fall on the spectrum and figuring out, you know, how do I then address it? They're finding ways to address it. But there still is more work to be done. And of course, with certain populations, as Mr. Bob talked about, you know, when you think about, you know, men of color, and their need to understand, like, you know, a level of awareness around what their needs are and how to address those needs. And, you know, just certain populations who's less likely to engage in any type of preventative treatment when it comes to mental health. So I just really want to talk about shifting the perspective on mental health and mental illness, more so on mental illness still, because when we think about historically, throughout history, one of the three main theories around causes of mental illness, and there's a few, but I'm going to just be talking about one of the few, which is supernatural ideology, which basically goes into, you know, you have a mental illness because God is upset with you, or you have a mental illness because you've sinned, or you're demonically possessed, or, you know, you have an evil spirit. And based on that level of understanding that they had back then around mental illness, the treatment really was what? If you're demonically possessed, then we're going to cast that demon out. So it was, you know, exorcism. There really was no treatment for mental illness because they didn't understand it then. But we've evolved in this area of focus, and there has been change over time. And so back then, you know, exorcism was a form of treatment. There were different forms of treatment, but we started to see some changes around the 1840s, right? So, you know, they wanted to really get all of these psychotic people off the streets. They weren't safe. People around them weren't safe. The community wasn't safe. And so they had to institutionalize them. But in institutionalize them, the treatment that they received, people were in conditions, very poor conditions. They lived in filth. They were chained to walls. They were viewed as animals and treated as such. They were pretty much living in inhumane conditions. And over time, treatment then evolved to the point in the 1950s where we were introduced to antipsychotics. And so now that we have somewhat of an understanding of psychosis, we can treat it. Now people can live in the community because we're able to manage the symptoms better. When we think of kind of like how mental illness was viewed back then, and thinking about even now, even though there's been such a progressive movement when it comes to understanding mental illness and treatment. Of course, there's still a lot of research that's being done. We don't understand it, 100%, but we've progressed over the years, but that residue is still there. When people think about mental illness, it's a stigma because it says that something is wrong with me. I'm not normal. And depending on what cultures you're from, you could, there is teachings around being, possessed. And so it's something to cover up. It's really not something to expose. And of course, if there's no exposure, how can we really treat, right? If there's no exposure, how can anything change? And so we understand that residue is still there in the minds of people in our cultures, in our societies, in our communities around mental illness. And so even though we're doing a lot of work, we really have to shift the way how we are really presenting mental illness and bringing awareness to our communities. So when we present mental illness, we really should be presenting it from a space of there's not just one cause for mental illness. It's not that I just have a genetic predisposition to mental illness. It's not just that. That's a part of it, but it's not just that. there are multiple factors that put someone at risk for developing a mental illness. I'm sorry, my light in my office just went off, so it makes me shine a little bit brighter. So the higher your risk factors is, the higher your chances in your mental health being compromised in some way. I always think about it as like, you know, if I have a cup and the more I keep on pouring into that cup, eventually what's going to happen is it's going to overflow. So if I have a predisposition to a mental illness because, you know, my father had a mental illness, or, you know, someone in my family had a mental illness, and then you add on top of that certain stressors. So I'm not able to, you know, meet my demands financially, or I am exposed to trauma, or I'm exposed to abuse, or I'm exposed to neglect. When you begin to add all these things, or I don't have adequate housing, or whatever the case may be, you start to add onto that, there's going to be an overflow. And sometimes people get to that point where not only am I, you know, predisposed to being diagnosed with a mental illness, but you add on certain like environmental factors into that, and it really triggers, then it could trigger a psychotic episode and really lead to a mental health diagnosis. That's to the point where I cannot, you know, function well in society, or I can't function well in my community, and I need to seek treatment. So there's not a single gene for mental illness. We're all vulnerable. Give the right atmosphere, all of us could have a psychotic break. There's times when I'm at work, you put that stress on me, I could have a psychotic break. But because over time, because of certain resources that I may have in my life, it may not reach to that point where I'm able to break. You know, I always say that there are certain people who are diagnosed with mental illness, give them the right treatment, they can live a lot better than someone who has a mental health issue and is just not doing well because they don't have the resources. So it's really the way how I oftentimes present it, you know, to people when I'm talking about mental illness, is like, we owe ourselves the right to be able to treat things that we see wrong in our lives. So for example, when you think about predisposition, my mother could have a history of high blood pressure. And because I'm aware of, you know, that gene, because I'm aware of what's coming, you know, what is in my lineage, you would say, or, you know, what runs in my family, what's in my family history, because I'm aware of that, I can begin to make changes in my own lifestyle that can help to manage my blood pressure. So even though I'm predisposed to high blood pressure, because of my awareness, I can be able to manage it. So I can start eating better. I can start, you know, working out. I can think about how I'm managing my stress throughout the day, things that I incorporate into my lifestyle to then control that. That's the same thing with someone who has, or who is more susceptible to a mental illness because of their history or because of their biological history. They can have a level of awareness. So you owe yourself the education, you owe yourself the understanding, you owe yourself the awareness, and then you owe yourself then the resources to be able to manage that. We all deserve that. If my high blood pressure gets out of whack, I owe myself to go to the doctor. It's my right to go to the doctor and to get treatment and to manage it well. When we think about mental illness, and I always make sure that I put it on kind of like that same line with physical illness, the same way how I owe myself the right, wow. So the same way how I owe myself the right to address my physical illness, and it doesn't mean that I have to be institutionalized or that I'm out of the norm. We're all susceptible to physical illness, depending on what state or lifestyles that we live or what our biological history may be, but we all owe ourselves the right to make sure that we're managing it. And so treatment is never something that is like a punishment. I think of treatment as it's a right. It's not a punishment, but it's a right that we all deserve. So according to when we also, so if you even think about like housing, because that's a major topic right now. We know that there's many initiatives that the mayor has in addressing homelessness. But when you think of even the homeless population, according to Bala Surya and his colleagues in their article on homelessness and mental health, part 1, over 60% of those who experience chronic homelessness also have a mental health condition. Now, someone who has homelessness, right? Someone who is homeless, they owe themselves the right to get services around addressing that criteria of being homeless, right? So because we know that that is a risk factor that can impact someone's mental health, the same way how homelessness could be a risk factor, our financial disposition could be a risk factor, our where we live in our home and family issues can be a risk factor. We owe ourselves the right to be able to address that. So we think of it as risk factors and protective factors. And so oftentimes when I speak with people about mental illness, I'm like, let's look at some of the risk factors, because we all have risk factors. And when we identify the risk factors, we're able to put certain services or we're able to put certain interventions in place that we owe ourselves to be able to address that. And of course, us addressing that is putting protective factors in place. So with the homeless population, when they're connected to services, they can get, housing vouchers. They're able to get, applications and services around 2010E applications so they can get supportive housing. This is something that they owe themselves. And if they have stable housing, then the chances of their mental illness being less triggered is more likely. So here at Kings County, we address all of that. We have both child and adolescent services. We have adult services. I'm only going to speak about the outpatient services that we do have. We have a child and adolescent outpatient clinic. We have a developmental evaluation clinic, and we have care coordination. We have our social workers who really identify some of the biopsychosocial needs of patients. They really go into, people's history and look at, their disposition. They look at the resources that they lack and source resources that they can put in place. And one of those resources that we utilize is our case managers and our community liaison workers, because they do a lot of that footwork to really connect people to services in the community. Because, as we talked about, when antipsychotics was really presented to help, people live in the community, our services that we put in place, not because someone has a mental illness means that they need to be institutionalized. They can live healthy lives if they're connected to the right resources in the community. And that's what we do for our child and adolescents, and also our adults here at Kings County Hospital. In our adult outpatient department, we have substance use treatment, we have outpatient treatment, we have a Kings On Track program. We have an On Track program that is for people who have their first psychotic break, our young adults between the ages of 17 to 30, who have their first psychotic break, and they have intensive services where they have, group therapy, they have individual therapy, they provide psychotropic medication and management. We have a partial hospitalization program here as well at Kings County. It's a 6-week intensive outpatient treatment where, people come in 5 days a week between the hours, I believe it's from 9 to 2:30, somewhere around there, and they're able to engage in groups. They're able to engage with their peers. They're able to get the support. They're able to get, psychotropic medication, their individual therapy. And so these are spaces that people go to, and they utilize the resources that are available to them to be able to live healthy lives. I always say, not because you have a mental illness doesn't mean that you cannot live a healthy and productive life. In our Kings On Track program, we also have educational services where, we get, people in the community who are in the program connected to services, school-based services. They're able to connect to career opportunities and really live well-rounded lives. And so We really need to move towards shifting the perspective of mental illness and mental health, and make sure that we're presenting in a way where people can understand it's not that something is wrong with me. It's just a matter of awareness and what I owe to myself to be able to live a healthy life in my community.
I was muted. Thank you so much, Latoya. My question to you though, how does one support a family member who does not want to engage in mental health treatment?
That's a really good question. I would say the first step in really wanting to support a family member is you understanding their changes and their symptoms more, because the more you understand is the more you're going to be able to then, communicate to them what you're seeing, your understanding of what you're seeing, and then be able to make recommendations. You don't want to force a family member who doesn't want to engage in treatment once there is resistance. Your best approach to resistance is awareness and education. If someone is already resistant to treatment, the more you force them or try to coerce them, is the more resistant they're going to become. And so you definitely want to yourself understand what you're seeing, understand the symptoms, educate yourself so that way you can support them and educate them. And hopefully over time, they will become more open to whatever recommendations you try to give them. I also want to add with that though, if you notice that a family member is a risk to themselves though, and a risk to others, that's something that you don't want to continue to coax over time. You need to be able to address that in the moment. And of course, there's the 988 suicide line, there's New York City Well, and there is your local emergency room where you should definitely encourage your family members to go and get evaluated, call 911 if they're a risk to themselves or to others, call 988 if you notice that there are any threats of suicide or anything of that nature. You definitely need to act right away.
Mr. Pruitt, you have a question?
Yeah, I would like to know, well, let me just say it quickly. I've recently become contracted with a disabling disease, and it's knocked me out of a career, and it knocked me out of working longer than I wanted to. And every now and then I get terribly depressed. I mean, maybe once or twice a day, once or twice a month, I might get terribly depressed because I realize what could have been. But when I tell my doctors that I think I'm depressed at times, they point out that they don't want to put me on any drugs at the moment, and so how do you go above your doctor? How do you go outside of your doctor to see a therapist? And also, how likely are mental illness likely to be treated by traditional health insurance?
So, Milford, thank you so much even for just speaking about what you're dealing with right now. It's a little confusing to me that your doctors wouldn't address that a little bit further. So if you are disclosing, is this your primary care physician that we're talking about?
No, it's a neurologist. My primary care physician was the one who diagnosed it. Okay,
so talking to your primary care physician is a really good avenue to getting connected to, even in a primary care setting, they can do basic screenings around anxiety and depression. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, 1/5 of all primary care visits address mental health concerns. So that's something that you should definitely talk to your primary care physician about, and they can give you a referral. And also, depending on where you live, you can go to any community-based clinic, outpatient clinic, and request services. Some may be depending on what insurance you have. You can always, depending on what insurance you have, you can also reach out to your insurance company and they can provide, you know, recommendations or referrals that's within your network for individual therapy. So you don't have to beg, you don't have to beg your doctor for referral.
Physical handicaps are known instigator behind mental illness. Physical being physically disabled is obviously a stressor that causes mental illness, correct?
It's a factor that can impact your mental illness, absolutely.
All right,
So
because I've
you-
never known this kind of depression before.
Absolutely. So you should definitely be seeing someone to really address your mental health concerns.
All right.
You know, I saw you shaking your head. Do you want to chime in or something on that?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's anytime you have a physical, right, condition where it's impeding or your normal routine in terms of you know, how you live your ADLs, which is your daily living skills. Anything that's impeding that can create stressors, you know, right? Because that's a trigger for any individual, right? And it could lead to the depressed mood, the depressed state, anxiety, you know, sadness, right? So the best course of action, like was mentioned before by Latoya, would be, right, conferring with your primary care physician, explaining to him or to them the situation in terms of how you're reacting to the condition and the mood that it presents to yourself, you know, and seeking that referral for services. Right, and this is exactly the things that we were talking about in terms of having that conversation, you know, instigating that dialogue, right, before things can further progress in the state, you know, for yourself. So definitely take that up with your primary care physician, explain to them the exact situation in which you just stated. And again, I commend you for using this format, right, to get yourself, you know, to get heard and to get yourself services and to get information. And this is a prime example of why we're here and why we, you know, organize and put this together. You know, so I just wish you all the best, you know, and I hope that you get the services and the assistance that you need.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you. So Latoya, I have when it comes to what advice you have for persons who may be listening, persons who are on now, what advice do you have for persons when it comes to addressing mental health and the first step that they should take?
Oh, sorry. So one of the first steps that anyone should take is, you know, first awareness. Like you have to be, you know, if I'm not aware of a problem that I have, then I'm not going to seek help. Why would I seek help if I have nothing to address? And so the first step is definitely awareness of the problem, recognizing how your symptoms impacts your daily functioning. As Mr. Bob just mentioned, you know, when you begin to see a change in how you function in society, then you should recognize that. There's a quote by Dean Ornish. She says, awareness is the first step in healing. And so, you know, even as family members or any friends around us that begin to see changes in how we present, we definitely want to make sure that we're always adding to that level of awareness to the point where you want to change that. I had mentioned already, you know, another step in addressing your mental health, even in the question that we addressed for Milford, is really talking to your primary care physician and then seeking out services when you're ready.
Thank you. We first today is thank you so much, Mr. Bob and Mr. Delmarge. We have with us one Moranon from he is the communication and outreach specialist from the Department of Health. One, with all the conversations that have been going on between Mr. Bob and Ms. Delmarge, is there anything, would you like to add anything as to the work that you're doing in your office? Is there anything that you would like to say?
Sure. And first of all, thank Ms. Delmage and Mr. Bob for opening the discussion about mental health and its importance to overall leading a healthy and happy life. And as I'm part of New York State of Health, which is the New York's health plan marketplace, and as both Mr. Bob and Ms. Delmage mentioned, taking advantage of these resources is important to our community members to lead healthy lives, right? And that's where New York State of Health comes in. We do offer different options as far as health coverage that our community members can attain. One thing that I want to also mention to Mr. Prewitt is that yes, New York State and federal law required that most comprehensive health insurance plans cover medically necessary mental health services. So do follow up with your health insurance, as both Mr. Bob and Ms. Delmage mentioned, to get the care you do need and you deserve. So, and just as a PSA, I guess, to bridge off that, during the pandemic of COVID-19, we've seen the effects that mental health can have on our communities and our community members. And during this time, during the public health emergency that was declared by the federal government, we've seen the numbers of enrollees in public health programs rise, especially here in New York. In the boroughs, for example, in Kings County, there have been, so 1 in every 3 New Yorkers is enrolled in coverage through New York State of Health. 1.9 million New Yorkers enrolled in coverage through New York State of Health during the COVID-19 pandemic. But now that the pandemic is, or the public health emergency has been declared to come to an end May 11th by the federal government, changes are coming into how the continuous enrollment is played out as part of the public health emergency. So after May 11th, we're going to start the unwind, where for the first time in 3 years, enrollees in different health coverage are going to need to take action to renew their health coverage and not have a gap in coverage, which is important. So we are reaching out to our community partners to disseminate the message and hopefully reach all the community members to keep in contact with New York State of Health, update your information in your account, to be aware that when your renewal date is coming up, to take action and renew your coverage so you don't risk a gap in coverage.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any questions? I have 1 or 2 more questions, but I want to give those who are on an opportunity to ask questions to either Mr. Delmage or Mr. Bob. And you can please use your hand raise icon to, if you have a question, and you will be acknowledged. I guess no one has any question. Okay, so as we move on, I know we had a representative from the DA's office, because we have a lot of persons, sometimes some of them, based on the interaction in the community, they're arrested, and sometimes they don't really seek help for them. They just, lock them up because of the damages they might have caused in the community. Sometimes someone will get hurt, and it's a variety of things. The various things do happen to them in the system. And I think Bob was talking about the system, the way that the system really deal with such individuals. And we have someone from the DA's office, Brooklyn DA, who wanted to give us as to how they're handling stuff and some of the resources that they have. Oh, Maria, you are here. So Maria is the Bureau Chief for Re-Entry Program from the Brooklyn DA. Welcome, Maria.
Good evening, everyone. Maria Abadia. We recently renamed our bureau. It's Community Resources and Reentry. It's reentry, it's community service as well, and it's all meshed into one. So our goal at the Kings County District Attorney's Office is to give services to anyone that's justice impacted that lives in Brooklyn, that committed the crime in Brooklyn. We're not only looking to incarcerate individuals, we're also looking to make sure we're a one-stop shop. if individuals have committed a crime, then they have to pay the penalty. However, there is an opportunity in Brooklyn to be able to get services after that penalty is paid. If there is people that have just been arrested and just went to central booking and are being released or have gotten a ticket, they are also eligible to come to the office and get services. We are at 345 Adams on the 7th floor. We don't check if you actually have been arrested or not. That's self-reporting. What we have on site is for everyone and it's for free. We give out Metro cards. We have GED classes that are run by District 79 on site. We take individuals 17 and a half to 80. We have the outreach program, which is substance abuse and mental health. It's co-occurring disorders. Sorry, it's late for me. And we also, in 2 weeks, we'll also have LSA on site that also does substance abuse and mental health. We give computer classes. There's a computer lab. We also do cognitive behavioral groups for individuals that have mandates with parole or probation, whether it's anger management or a Ready Set Work, which is soft employment skills. Workforce One comes on site. And if you don't have a resume, they will create a resume and then immediately link you to jobs. Our goal is to hire an employment specialist that will also be on site. We are right now in the midst of interviewing social workers. So anyone who knows a social worker, and I would prefer a male social worker of someone of color like us that can vibe with the community. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone that, can relate to the individuals that are walking in. So we're going to be a full service bureau, and it's not on site, and that's purposeful because our goal is for people to feel comfortable in the location. This is not about prosecution. This has nothing to do with prosecution in that sense. We are run by the district attorney's office. It is a bureau out of 1,200 employees, but this is about people getting help.
Thank you so much, Maria, because one of my concerns is that when we are looking at mental health, we are looking at those individuals getting arrested. Some of them, they get medical treatment. Some of them, they placed behind bars. But when and sometimes they are just released out in the community with nothing to go to, nothing to do. And it is very important that we have some sort of service for them. It's just a matter of just pumping them with medication and give them so much. But and we need to know that when they're out there and when they did the hospitals, One Brooklyn Health and Kings County Hospital, after those persons, they receive all the treatment that needed, and they're placed out there into the community. They need something. They need somewhere to go. They need to learn something. They need some sort of a skill. So thank you so much for being here and for the service that you're offering to the community. Mr.
You're
Bob,
welcome.
go ahead. Yes, go ahead, Maria.
I just wanted to say that when people are released after serving, whether a state sentence, a state bid, or released from Rikers is supposed to release them with medication, 30-day supply. Sometimes, as you all know, it doesn't happen, and that's unfortunate, but there are places that they can go. From upstate, they're not released with anything. There are new laws coming to effect. People are being released with documentation. The push is to get everybody released from upstate with health insurance so that there won't be a lapse in coverage. But unfortunately, the DA's office is unfortunately not responsible when people are released from these prison settings without proper medication. But I can speak a little to when people have mental illness and they are facing a charge within Supreme Court. There is a mental health court in Brooklyn. It's called MD1. It is run by Bureau Chief Kelly. He was one of the people that Karen was trying to get to come on and talk about that. But it's a process, and it's probably, It's a long process, and it's a process that defense attorney has to push for at the beginning. And it's part of, because the defense attorney doesn't push for it, the ADA wouldn't know that the individual has a situation happening with them. So a defense attorney has to be really involved, present documentation and information to the ADA and the judge, and ask for mental health court. Sometimes they don't want to, because mental health court, if you take a plea, it's going to be a year or more of services. I really like it because there's a social worker, there's a psychiatrist, there's a whole host of supportive personnel that make sure that you get the help that you're supposed to get. But some folks aren't willing to wait out the time period that it takes, because they're not making decisions overnight. They want to make sure that they're accepting people that are supposed to be there.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Bob, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, Maria, for your presentation and the services that you provide to the community. For instance, let's say, I have a client that come in for mental health treatment, right? He's stable. He had a career prior to, and he has a record, or he was arrested at some point throughout his life based upon his mental health condition when he was. Is it possible for you guys to provide a service so an individual who wants to re-enter the workforce but requires like a letter of like a disposition proving that his case was settled and he's no longer on a record or on the papers of sort? Do you guys provide that type of service for an individual that wants to get that letter of disposition?
We can help them. I can tell them exactly where to go. If an individual is stable and they're stable and they're ready to work, send them. We can help them. And, there are times that we have placed people in employment that aren't stable, because some people could present good one day and you see them on the good day. And that's the day that you sent them to the employment. And on the day they show up to the employment, they fall apart. So we've had all types of scenarios. We don't say no to anyone. The only reason we would exit somebody from our office is they're acting violently. But anybody that walks in gets service.
Oh, thank you so much. That's great to know.
Thank
you.
you. If you do need, we don't have a chat, so she cannot put her information in there. I can get you her information if you need to get in touch with her.
All right. Thank you so much.
You can share the flyer with everyone if you have.
Okay. All right. Mr. Purett, go ahead. You are muted.
I'm curious, what is the disadvantage against having a social worker show up before the police do at a psychotic episode incident? I see that a lot of cities are starting to let social workers show up at domestic disputes and such incidents before they invite an armed cop to show up. What is your opinion on that?
Okay, so the question is on the floor, so anyone can answer. Go ahead, Maria.
It's a loaded question. Obviously, we would all want for there to be mental health professionals to show up versus police officers who aren't trained to handle the situations. People are moving into those directions. However, that takes laws to change. I'm definitely not the person to speak to that, because I am not in charge of NYPD. You would need to, get them involved in those type of conversations, but they all want that. I mean, people are moving towards those spaces, and that's why so many folks are ROR'd even after they are arrested. So, you know, my best answer is we're all moving towards that. Sometimes it's a slower move than others, but that takes funding. It takes, you know, ordinances change it. So I see it happening. It's just not happening right now.
Okay.
So I think that the last time what I heard is that the social workers, they equip they're trained to calm down that person, to be able to talk that person down, to walk them away, because most of the time it's just like the incident on the train. And one of my colleagues, you know, who he's a bystander trainer, and that's one of the things he was saying. He said, hey, if I was on the train, I could have maybe avoid this from happening, because I could have calmed him down, because here it was Mr. Neely was saying, well, I'm hungry, I'm homeless, so I really don't care. So what happened? I don't care if the cops come, I don't care if I die, I don't care if they take me to prison. And he was just going on and on and on, you know. And then if you have someone who is trained, they are able to now call on that person and say, hey, you know, let me talk to you or something. You may not want to, because some person could get really out there, and some person you may be able to know what to say to them to subdue them. So I think that's what they're looking at, because many times in many incidents have happened. We had a lady from the Bronx, and we had several persons from Brooklyn, that the police officers, when they get there, now some police officers, there are certain police officers who they train them. There are certain areas that they were trained to deal with person, just to see that, okay, this person is really having a breakdown. But most of them, when you get there on the scene, the first thing they're thinking of is, so they said, hey, this person is coming to me for a baseball bat. You have a gun opposed to a baseball bat, or that person had a knife, you know? So hence the reason why they are looking to stop police officers when persons, if a family member should call and say, hey, you know what, my brother and my whoever is behaving irrational, and then he has a mental health issues. So the first thing they will do is to try to tap into some person to be able to go and talk to that person and try to calm the person down before the police officers get there. Because, you know, the first thing that happened, the gun is drawn, bullets fired, and question asked later. So they're trying to, you know, reverse that cycle to stop this from happening. Anyone else have any questions for our speakers for the night? So I'm assuming not, because it's like the information given was well received. Mr. Bob, thank you so much for taking time for being here, and Latoya, Delmarge, thank you for being here, and also Mr. Morano, who came in and offering, and it's very important, because when you think of insurance, you know, and persons need help, the first thing that they ask you what type of insurance you have, so they don't treat the treatment first, the problem first. They ask you what type of insurance you have. If you don't have insurance, then you know you're on your own. Some places, when you look at Kings County Hospital and you look at some of the city hospitals, most of them, they will treat you, but some areas that you go, then you know they kind of give you the runaround. So I'm very thankful for Mr. Pruitt for, you know, your questions, and for, you know, just letting us know as to what's happening to you and what services that you're looking to get. And for every one of you, each and every one of you who took the time to be here with us, you know, and although I was expecting to get more questions asked, but because we don't have, so Enid, you know, for working behind the scene, for, you know, working to have Mr. Bob to come on board, and Latoya for just, you know, meeting with us and talking, and for Maria, I'm saying Maria's gone. So for Maria being here with us, just coming on,
I'm still
and
here.
just you know, just stepping in for the gentleman who was supposed to come in. So I just want to thank each and every one of you, and I'm hoping that, you know, the next time we will have this discussion again, because it's very important that we have this discussion, you know, and just bring much information to the table, and have person to ask questions and bring awareness to our community. So we need to continue the conversation. We will not let it just be this one time, and we need it to continue. And looking also to bring much resources to the community that what our people, young people and family members will get the resources and bring much awareness to them when it comes to mental health. As it was said, it could happen to any one of us. Today, for me, I lose it in traffic, right? So when I'm driving, I just wish that I had a tractor trailer that I can just run over, over cars in the. So I know what it is. So control, self-control, and then we can lose it like this. It could happen to any one of us, any of our families, and we do need the support. We all need the support. But one thing that we have to remember, there is nothing wrong when it comes to seeking help. Nothing wrong is going to sit in the chair, talk to somebody. And if you don't want to do that, you have a friend, you have 2 or 3 friends. And for our male in our gathering right now, talk to a friend. Don't be too macho. Talk to a friend. I want to just thank each and every one of you again. Have a good evening and looking forward to seeing you pretty soon. Thank you again.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Mia, I forget to thank Community Board 9 for Mia for being here with us, for manning we almost had some little,
Oh, you're welcome.
crazy thing going on out there. So, but thank you, Mia, and thank you for the Kings County CAB for your support, for being here with us as well. Have a good night, everyone. And for
You're
the
welcome,
Community
friend.
Board
Take
9,
care. Good night,
have a good
everyone.
night. Bye.